Dan Peterson, man, there's not many people on this podcast, man, that we've had a quad Pete, a four Pete, but here we are. It's good to
Yeah,
have you.
yeah, it's great to be back. Excited to shoot the breeze and talk about parenting and raising kids and everything that includes.
Me too, man. Me too.
Yeah.
What's really interesting is that I've gotten more emails from you as a guest than quite a few others, which
Oh, wow.
which I thought was fascinating. So it really holds true that I think your message really resonates with us as parents, and it's so valuable, and it's something. Quite frankly, if we can actually put the previous links in the show notes of when you were on before, but the practicality of what you teach is incredible. But before we get into all that, and we're going to get into some different topics today, and we're going to get into some stories of parents and their kids and their
Yeah.
experience and how they were able to clean things up and all that good stuff. But I want to give the audience some context of why you're doing what you're doing and how you were raised.
Yeah, we could probably talk the entire time just on that, but
Probably so.
yeah. So just for a little context, so I got married when I was 25, and we waited 7 years before we had our first child. So 32 is when I became a dad. And just for a little context, my parents had me when they were 18, and they had six boys by the time they were 32. And, I just think about the maturity, life experience, kind of getting your marriage off to the right steps and on the right path and having a good foundation before you become a parent. My wife and I did that conscientiously, but I think the way that my parents raised us, they were always like kind of chasing their tail. Having a child when you're 18, 19 years old, and then every 2 years after that having another one, there was just a lot of stress, a lot of um, I don't know. I just feel like my parents did the absolute best they could, but the role models that they were given, the age that they were, the income level that they had, like all of those were just variables that made it really difficult to be super in tune to parenting and skills. And for me, I realized at a very early age that I was going to do things a little bit differently. And when I got, to the age of 18 or 19, it was really clear that I had a gift to work with kids and really was in tune to what they needed. And just kind of a long story, really, really long. Just decided to become a therapist. I started working with kids, right out of college. And for me, there's kind of been this weird blend of having to mature at a very young age, leading to just being really in tune to what kids need, and then kind of compound that with some of the things that I needed that I didn't get. All of that kind of came to a head. I would say probably right when I was around 22, and I was just like, I really, really, really enjoy kids, know what kids need. I can walk into a room and see a bunch of kids that are all together, and within minutes, just point out all the kids that are struggling and know exactly how to help them and know what to need. And I think having that gift combined with a set of tools and strategies to help them is really just giving me a lot of joy. So I don't know if that answers your direct question or not, but that's kind of like being raised in a home where there was a lot of kids, parents constantly stressed, very young age becoming, a parent for them. And then for me, contrasting that with becoming a parent at age 32 and then having all this time in between. I just have a heart for kids. I have a heart for parents. I feel like I'm pretty gifted with a set of tools to help them. And that's kind of like what led to becoming a therapist and then essentially a parent coach.
Mm. I'm curious, walking into a room and you see kids, what are some of the telltale signs that a kid is doing well? And then what are some of the signs that you see where a kid is struggling? And again, I'm sure they're all different, but
Yeah.
maybe collectively, if you could give us more of a 30,000 foot view of what it is that you see, or maybe even as we as parents can, what we should have our radar on might be helpful.
Yeah. Yeah, so when I see a group of kids, things that I'm really just drawn to is connection. It's pretty easy for me to pick up on kids that feel confident, that are pretty well connected. And when I say connected, they just relate well to others. They feel good in their own skin. They can just go walk up, they can lead, they can interact with others really well. They just seem content and happy and at peace. Then I can see the kids that are on the outliers, or they're they out on the outside looking in. You can tell that they're a little more tentative and anxious. And the way that that presents is they're either just kind of observing, or they're on their own, or they're just copying what other kids are doing to try to fit in. And when you're observing kids, it's almost like you can tell that they're uneasy and they're anxious, and they're worried about maybe being rejected, or maybe they don't have the right social skills. And for me, I'm just really drawn to those kids. I don't know if that kind of was the way that I felt growing up. Wasn't really like secure in myself and real sure, even though I was really, really talented and had lots of friends. But for me, just being able to pick up on that has led to me being able to connect to those kids well, and then figure out what are the tools they need to help them connect better.
So you said some of the telltale signs of a kid who might be struggling might be one who's more observing, who's one maybe is having a hard is more isolated, kind of going off on their own and that kind of thing. If we have members in the audience listening and that's what they see, what are some things that parents can do to help with that?
Yeah, I think the best thing you can do, and you talk a lot about this, in the different circles that I've listened to you, just about creating psychological safety. Kids don't want to talk about feeling uncomfortable or feeling left out or feeling anxious. Having conversations usually exasperates that, and they'll just want to shut down. So for me, what I like to do, or what I would encourage parents to do, is just to observe it. It looked like you're uncomfortable. You
Mm.
saw all those kids talking, and I didn't see you talking much. You were kind of just waiting. Or, I saw you biting your nails a lot, or like those kids were all talking and laughing and having a good time. And then I saw you didn't seem to have a smile on your face. When you just make those observations, but don't try to get them to talk about it, it helps them feel seen. Helps them feel understood. And it really just opens up the door for them to be able to talk and want to talk about
Does a conversation like that work with, like, 7, 8, 9 year old, or do the kids maybe more or less, are we talking about maybe older kids?
it. No, I think at a very young age is when you should be doing that. My kind of the age group that I do a lot of work with is usually between 4 and 12. And whether it's a 4-year-old or a 12-year-old, they use that same tool every time.
Interesting. Okay.
Yeah.
Um, do you think that that type of behavior is even on a parent's, like a just normal run of the mill, just us as normal parents, that's even on our radar? Or do you think we just sort of tack it up as like, oh, they just like to go play by themselves, or they just, they're just shy? Or is that how we identify it? And there could be more going on.
Well, if you don't notice it and it just goes right over your head, or it's not on your radar, what's going to happen is they're going to come up with some more creative ways to get your attention. And that's usually, like, kids are really annoying. That's one of the kind of telltale signs that it's kind of gotten to a point where they're needing to be seen and noticed. And so they'll create problems that will get on the adult's radar. So annoying, or it doesn't seem like they understand social cues. The other thing parents that I work with will say a lot is, like, the kids tell them to knock it off or stop, or asking them, and they don't seem to be either understanding or listening to that and adjusting their behavior. They just keep doing it over and over and over again. And so from where I sit, you either need to put it on your radar, or what's going to happen is they're going to put it on your radar, and it's going to be kind of way down the road in that position where they're going to need a lot more help.
Mm. What are some things, if left unchecked with little kids like that, that are displaying those types of behaviors? What, as they get older into the adolescence and preteen and tween and teenager, like what kind of things will that turn into sometimes?
Yeah, I mean, depression, anxiety, you're not feeling connected, you don't have your social group, you become really self-conscious. probably more likely to fall into peer pressure just to be accepted, or you isolate more, and that's where the depression and maybe more of the anxiety comes. Um,
Interesting.
I think as parents, everybody's worried about getting involved with the wrong group of kids and being able to stand up for what your morals and your values are. But when you're really, really wanting to fit in and maybe you're on the outside looking in, you're much more likely or vulnerable to do things that normally you wouldn't do. Um, I mean, probably more of the extreme thing, that's when kids get involved in drugs or alcohol, or maybe even sometimes have thoughts of hurting themselves or
Yeah.
self-injury type stuff. That's a little bit more extreme, but again, needing to fit in, needing to connect, needing to have a group of people that you feel accepted by and you feel like you're valued. That's a human need that doesn't go away as you age. In fact, that probably becomes even more important.
Yeah, it does. And I could see how that would definitely exacerbate into something obviously way worse as kids get older, because obviously I think one of the deepest needs and the deepest fears for people is to be isolated, right? And to be alone. And,
Yeah,
we'll do anything for that kind of connection. So,
sure.
um, I want to go back to, just you personally, so the audience can get to know you a little bit more personally. And that is, so you were the oldest of six brothers. How old was the youngest compared to you?
Yeah, we're 12 years apart.
Six brothers in 12 years.
Yeah.
Like your mom must be a saint. I mean,
Yeah, honestly, there was a period in my life, Larry, where I felt like angry at my parents just because there were certain things that happened when you're growing up in a large family and your parents are pretty burned out. Um, Being really in tune to what all of your kids' needs, that's just, I don't think it's humanly possible when you have six kids and you're pregnant or breastfeeding most of most of my childhood. But when I became a parent at 32 and I have three kids now, like when I got my third kid, that's when I was starting to feel overwhelmed, or this is really a lot of work. I could not imagine having six kids. Like to me, that's beyond what my bandwidth is. And I'm a lot more mature and a lot older and a lot more established than my parents were when they became parents. So I think I have a lot more compassion and patience and understanding and gratefulness for how my parents raised us. And yeah, I'm just trying to think like from the time I was born until 12, my parents, but especially my mom, because she was the one home all the time, she was like sleep deprived, exhausted, having to take care of a newborn, or all like the hormonal changes, of having a baby grow inside of you. So I was just pushed into this role of having to help and take care of my brothers. I I'm not sure how you were raised, but do you remember those cloth diapers?
oh, totally. Yeah.
Like my job was to clean all of those.
Oh my
And
God.
I did stuff like that, or I would go get groceries before school sometimes, and I just bring my mom's check, and I would sign her name, and I'd buy a couple $100 worth of groceries, come home, put the groceries away, pack lunches, wake up my mom, and then it'd be time to go to school, and stuff like that was totally normal for me. Looking back, I definitely had way more responsibility than I probably most kids do, but it really put me into this position of taking care of others and really being in tune to what my brother's needs were and what my mom's needs were. I think to a fault sometimes, but I think it really fine-tuned some skills that have helped me excel as a coach and as a therapist.
You had to grow up really fast.
Yeah, super
Like,
fast.
yeah, as you talk, like, I mean, that's the one thing that just really emerges for me is that you had to grow up extremely fast. Let me ask you this, just going back to your childhood even more, was it hard for you to relate to other kids your age because other kids your age weren't doing the things you were doing?
Yeah, yeah, a lot. And just talking about being one of those kids on the outside looking in, even though I was really athletic and was on all the sports teams and I had friends, I never felt comfortable in my own skin. I always felt like, there was something different about me. And, I wonder if that has something to do with, I wasn't just free to be a kid the whole time. I was like a kid maybe 30% of the time, and then a parent 70% of the time. And just being able to relax and enjoy just being a kid and doing kid things. A lot of times I missed out on that.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm sure. And I'm sure even from a mental and emotional state, like you were mentally and emotionally older
Yeah.
than some of your peers, not just physically doing things different, but you were probably thinking things different, having maybe even a different emotional experience than most kids your age.
Yeah. What's interesting too is I didn't do a whole lot of sleepovers. My kids right now, one of my kids is asking for a sleepover every single weekend,
Same.
for the last like 15 years. But I never had anybody sleep over at my house. I never wanted anybody to come to my house. And part of that was we lived in a small house and it was packed with kids, but I just didn't feel comfortable in having my friends see me in my home in the way that things were.
Mm.
And sometimes I go over and spend the night, but for the most part, I'm just thinking like having sleepovers is like the thing kids do. And I never felt comfortable doing that. I never felt comfortable having people come and spend the night at our house. And, I think part of that was just feeling awkward or feeling out of place, probably, due to like where I was at emotionally and mentally.
Maybe you slept over at other people's houses when you need some sleep. Maybe that is.
Yeah, there was a time. So we grew up in a house. It was like a 1,200 square foot home.
Yeah,
It
sounds
was
about
two
right.
stories, so it was like 600 and 600. We had 2.5 bedrooms, and there was a point where we had two bunk beds and a trundle, or like a mattress that slid out. And I remember, I think I was like seventh grade, sleeping on that mattress, and one of my brothers fell out of the bunk and landed on me in the middle of the night.
No.
Yeah, yeah, and that was the sign. Okay, we need to move Dan out. We need to get him somewhere else. It's probably not safe to have somebody sleeping there.
Oh my God, dude. Okay.
Yeah.
Well, real quick before we move on, like, was this like a face plant on a face plant, or were you at least sleeping on your side, or what do you
No,
remember?
I was sleeping on my back and he fell off and his knee hit my thigh. It was like the worst Charlie horse. I couldn't walk for like a week.
Oh my God, dude. What a horrible
Yeah.
way to wake up, man.
Yeah.
Oh my
Yeah.
gosh.
But we
Uh,
were packed like sardines,
yeah.
but again, when you're growing up, you don't think like what you know. And my kids all have their own room, they all have their own space. And I know my wife and I did that intentionally, but sharing a room with four of my brothers, yeah,
It was
that
like
wasn't
normal.
probably super comfortable, but it was normal.
Hmm. That's fascinating, man.
Yeah.
That is quite an experience. So we just a quick story. Me and the boys, we were talking about just, you know, we're going on vacation this summer, and we're doing a cruise, and we've never been on a cruise as a family, and we decided to do that this year. It's something we've always wanted to do. And the boys are like, "Where are we sleeping?" I was like, "Oh, we're sleeping stacked. You should see these rooms. It's like a closet. Like it's like they're super small. We're all sharing
The
beds."
barracks.
I know. And they're like, "What?" And I'm like, and we do this all the time. When we go on vacation. Nobody has their own bed. Nobody has their own room.
Yeah.
And they're like, "Oh, who I gotta sleep with?" And I was like, "Dude, I have slept with every single one of you, and have gotten my butt kicked in the middle of the night over and over and over again." I'll never forget this one time, Dan. Like my son, and he was 8 at the time. He's my 18-year-old now. He like sat up and literally rolled over, and it was like his entire arm, like it took like and just rocked me right in the face. And I woke up to him like just, how you get hit in the nose and you're like, it just startles you. I was like, "Oh my God." And I woke up and I pull and I turn over, and his hand had moved from my face down to my chest. And I'm like, "Dude," I'm just like, I could not go back to sleep. I could not imagine an entire like body
Yeah.
falling on me from like a higher like altitude of like a bunk bed. It's just
Yeah.
crazy. Man, that's nuts.
Yeah.
So
We got lots of stories.
I bet, yeah. So having this experience growing up, you went away to school, and this is what you pursued, was being a licensed family therapist. Was it, looking back on it, was this because like, I think I know a thing or two about family dynamics. Maybe I might be pretty
Mhm.
good at this.
Yeah. It's interesting. When I went away to college, my first year, like as I'm leaving, my mom said, um, just so you know, you can't come back. And it's because we don't have room. We got a dog. There's no more room for you.
We have a dog. There's no more
Yeah,
room
they got
for
a
you.
dog and replaced me. I came home for, Christmas and Thanksgiving and breaks, but um, I was going to be an accountant. I went to school. I played basketball for a couple of years, and I really liked numbers and budgeting, and thought I was going to become an accountant. Realized after one semester of that, there's no chance. And then I didn't have any idea what I was going to do until about a year and a half later. I took a child psychology class, and it was the most fascinating class I had, and just started taking classes on brain and behavior and physiology and family systems. And I was just totally enthralled with it. And I think learning about that from a psychological point of view, plus the way that I was raised, started to really explain a lot of things that maybe I was confused about, and it just really equipped me and kind of lit a fire in me on like how I can help families. Because I think every parent, I've been doing this like 20 years, 28 years. I haven't met a parent that's trying to screw their kid up. All the parents that I've worked with, even, parents with no skills at all and just really dysfunctional, they love their kid. They want more than anything to be able to make this right and do a good job. They just don't have a clue. Some of them do. It doesn't mean that they're trying to screw things up. So having a heart and a desire to help kids, and then through that, equipping and training parents, I've just found it's so rewarding when you get to see a parent and a child all of a sudden have a good connection, and the kid's behavior improves and the parent gets the credit. Yeah, like for me, if I can help create and lead that way, it's so rewarding.
What have you found that is one of the biggest missing pieces, or pieces, if obviously there's more than one, that parents just miss, just in my own experience and doing this work, and the work that you do, which is, by the way, way more in depth, is that we're just simply not trained in this stuff. Like you mentioned accounting, right? And I've never taken an accounting class. Like I know how to balance my checkbook, but if I had to go be a CPA tomorrow, and the whole and society and the world was set up of like, oh yeah, go be a CPA, figure it out. You'll be fine. There's lots of CPAs. People have been CPAs for years. So like, just go figure it out. You'll be fine after a while. Make mistakes, but you'll figure it out. Same thing with like basketball. Like I played little league basketball, and I remember not even knowing how to dribble, right? When I first got started in like fourth grade or whatever it was. And then like learning how to shoot free throws and all these things. We had a coach and someone who told us what to do and how to do it. With parenting, the story I keep telling myself over and over again, but I would love for you to give us more detail around what you see, is like, we don't know what we don't know. And then on top of that, like if we need help, oh, then we're weak, we're broken, we're not up to the task. It's all these like self horrible, these horrible things that we tell ourselves,
Mhm.
that we're weak parents, we're not up to the task, like we're broken. And we're just not set aside and, taught these things. And then on the flip side of it, we don't want to raise our hand either, because we're like, I really suck. Like
Yeah.
those are the labels we put on each other. Why is that?
Um, yeah, a few thoughts I had when you were saying that is like parenting is a very weird dynamic because you're in charge of another human being. You're responsible for their well-being. And if you don't know what you're doing, or if you're struggling with that, and you're in a position of authority or power or responsibility, and asking for help puts you at a really, really big risk, right? It's like the president of the United States raising his hand and saying, I don't know what I'm doing here. I need some help, right? That's probably a terrible example, even though
Yeah,
it super applies these days.
I know we could go in all kinds of directions with
Yeah.
that one.
But just think of like, okay, I'm supposed to know what to do. I have the responsibility of raising this child, but I don't know what I'm doing, or I'm really struggling. It's just a very interesting paradigm. So I think for me, what I found to be really helpful is for me to share the areas where I struggle, or when I'm working with parents, totally normalize that and really focus on what was the blueprint you were given or the roadmap you were given. Were you taught that explicitly or was that more implicit? And then what is it that you want and how do we create a roadmap together to get there? Because, you don't want to screw this up. You don't want to, for me, and I'm hearing your story too, like a lot of what I'm doing is trying not to do what my parents did. But at the same time, what do I want to do instead? If you don't have both of those married together, what you're doing is you're just like coming from a place of trying not to make mistakes rather than knowing where you're going and how to get there.
That makes total sense. Yeah, it takes a big, like, swallowing your ego, and
Mhm.
and unfortunately, and I'm sure you probably see this. Do you see mostly parents will raise their hand when a crisis rears its head?
Sure.
Yeah.
Well, here's another obstacle is if I'm going to raise my hand and say I don't know what to do when it comes to raising kids, or more specifically, my kids acting out, they're having explosive episodes, or they're emotionally dysregulated, or the school says they have ADHD. Like when people hear that, what they're saying is go see a child therapist or go see a psychiatrist and look at medication. Most parents aren't comfortable going down that road, or that creates a lot of anxiety and worry. But they don't know what the other alternatives are. They don't know that there's coaching for parents. So there's people out there that can actually explain what's happening, let them know that it's not their fault. They're not screwing their kids up on purpose. It's the tool's fault or the lack of tools. It's that's the culprit. And then what to do instead. To me, when I'm able to have those kind of conversations with parents that are struggling, I just see a huge sigh of relief. They're like, yes, I don't want to do medication, or no, I don't want to put my kid in therapy. I didn't know there was somebody that can teach me what to do. And for me, being able to kind of shift from being a therapist, because that's what I did for, I don't know, 18 years. I did individual and group therapy directly with children. When I became a parent, I couldn't no longer sit across the table from parents that were struggling and say, try harder, figure out what motivates your kid and give them rewards, or be really, really consistent and strict with your discipline. Like if it was that simple, they wouldn't be struggling. And so when I became a parent and I was really enjoying raising my kids, but I would meet these parents that were in agony because they deeply love their kids, they deeply want what's best for them, but they don't know how to get there. I was like, I have to switch gears. Instead of treating the child, I want to train and equip parents so they can be the hero. They get the credit when the kid improves. And it happens in the environment where the kid's struggling at home. You resolve that, and then the parent and child connection and relationship is better. It's so much more sustainable. And then the kid gets the credit, the parent gets the credit rather than a medication or a therapist.
Yeah. No, I like that. Even as you said that, that it's not necessarily the parents that are broken. It's just more of a lack of the tools and the knowledge of exactly what to do.
Yeah.
Because anything else, we learn it. I'd love for you to share uh, some story. By the way, actually, before we get to some stories, because obviously that's what I think would be just invaluable to the audience, because we as human beings, we relate to story and we put ourselves in those shoes as parents, or even the kids in their experience, when we were like, wow, that's me, or like that's what I'm dealing with. What exactly is the difference between what a therapist does and what a coach does?
Um, I'll speak from my personal and like professional experience here. So I don't want to generalize this to every therapist out there, but typically when you're in the role of being a therapist, you're looking at symptoms. You're looking at what's broken, what's wrong. And oftentimes there's some kind of like injury or trauma or mental health diagnosis that you have in the back of your mind. And while you're interviewing and evaluating someone, you're finding the list of symptoms that fit into a category so you can give a diagnosis. And then that diagnosis, which is a mental health diagnosis, is going to lead to some kind of route you want to take to alleviate those symptoms. Once those symptoms, aren't so difficult anymore, or the problems aren't as intense or as frequent, then they're done with therapy. However, coaching is more, where is it that you're at and where do you want to go and what are the tools you need to get you there? And so it's very focused on what is it that you want to create instead of how do we alleviate problems and symptoms.
Mm.
It's interesting. We were just talking about this prior to hitting record. Both of us had surgery for an injury. And we went and saw a physical therapist, and the physical therapist is trying to strengthen the area that was traumatized or damaged or needed surgery. And once you get strong enough or those symptoms go away, then you're done. Whereas a trainer or a personal fitness coach is going to say, okay, what is it that you want to accomplish? Well, I want to, have 10% body fat. I want to be able to bench press 350 pounds. I want to be able to run an ultra marathon, like whatever your goal is. Okay, here's the activity to do every single day. And if you do that consistently, you're going to be able to get there. And there's a certain amount of time you spend with them, and then it becomes your own skill set, and then you know what to do on your own.
Do you think that there is an appropriate time for one versus the other, or do you think that more people should be doing coaching, or do you think that they more people should be in therapy, or is it
No,
totally
I think there's a
individual?
need for both. Yeah, definitely. I think and for me, working with or representing kids that have, emotional and behavioral problems, if there's a trauma that's happened, just doing coaching isn't going to be enough. If there's some kind of dysfunction happening or some kind of significant mental health issue, you're going to need a therapist and a clinician that's going to help treat the trauma or the root of what's going on.
Do you mind if I
Um,
ask you a bit more about trauma?
yeah.
And by the way, I cut you off, so go ahead and continue, and then I'll ask about trauma.
No, I was going to just compare that to coaching and situations like that. But yeah, let's stick with the trauma piece for a sec.
What exactly does trauma do to the brain? And then on top of that, are there what type of different degrees of trauma are there? Because I can only imagine there's like micro traumas, things that will impact us, but then there's like, you know, really big ones at the same time. But what
Yeah.
exactly does trauma do to like the brain, and then how we perceive the world and problems and relationships and all that? I know it's a monster question, but I'm sure
Mhm.
you could probably answer it.
Yeah, I'll keep it fairly simple just for the context of this conversation. So when you're looking at children who have been traumatized while they're in the same, stage where they're dependent upon adults and caregivers for their safety, for their well-being, for their upbringing, it can do a lot of damage because trying to form trust and you're developing blueprints on how you're going to connect and attach and relate to other people, that all happens in childhood. And it's when you're the most vulnerable and you're at the mercy of the adults that are charged with raising you and taking care of you. So what happens when a kid's traumatized, they form an imprint about how the world's going to operate. What can I expect from the adults? What type of relationship? So it's very difficult to trust. It's very difficult to attach. It's very difficult to ask for help and rely that your needs are going to be met when you've been traumatized as a kid. And a lot of times traumatized kids become these power and control hungry people because they need a sense of control and power. And the way that they're going to get it isn't by controlling themselves, it's by refusing to comply with adults. Who are the most important, powerful people in your world? And if you do the opposite of what they say, you get a sense of power. You get a sense of I don't need to rely on you. I'm going to rely on myself. I can't trust others. And a lot of times when we see kids that are defiant or they're stuck in power struggles, it's not because they're deviant kids, it's because they don't trust. It's because they've been traumatized and they don't know how to let their guard down because the brain, that fight or flight center of your brain, is always on. You're constantly scanning for danger. You're constantly anxious. You're on edge, just waiting, for an opportunity to fight. If you're not careful, that can look like ADHD, that can look like anxiety, that can look like oppositional defiant disorder. And that's where I think the mental health field gets it screws things up a lot, is because we look at symptoms and say this kid's power hungry or inattentive or hyperactive. And we say it's ADHD or it's some kind of oppositional defiant disorder, but no, it's a traumatized kid that's scared to death to rely and be vulnerable for someone.
Never heard it. I've never heard it said quite like that. You know, I've always
Mhm.
heard the diagnosis, but never like the backstory behind that, right? Of
Sure.
why that's happening or what's actually what's happening underneath all that. But that provides a ton of clarity. Can you can you help us with maybe a story or two where and maybe share the story as in, you know, the child was doing this, the parents were experiencing this, and
Mhm.
here's what was the issue, and here's what we did about it, and this was the outcome.
Sure. Well, typically I get phone calls from parents who are saying, I think my kid needs therapy, or at least that's what the school's saying, or that's what, our friends are saying, that's what society says. And really what's going on is the kids having a very difficult time regulating themselves. They have like these extreme emotional reactions. I think typically what they describe as kids at this age should normally be reacting like at a number three from an emotional level, but my kid has these exaggerated emotional responses all the time. They're yelling, they're crying, they're angry, they can't deal with change, they have a hard time transitioning, or they are triggered by the word no and have these angry or aggressive outbursts. But the common theme is we as the parent and the tools we have for discipline, it's making it worse. And I'm stressed. I lose sleep. I cry myself to sleep, or I'm getting off of work and I start to get super anxious. As this I'm getting closer to the house because I have no idea what I'm going to walk into. But typically that's the state the parents are in, and they're like, please help, because I feel helpless and I feel powerless and I can't go on this way anymore. And when we start talking about what's going on and what they've tried, the typical path that parents have been on is we've read books, we've talked to counselors, we've talked to the school, and all of them are just saying the same thing. Try harder, get on the same page, find out what motivates your kids. And really we've tried all those things, but nothing's working. In fact, it's making it worse. And now I'm worried what's going to happen when they're a teenager. So coming, reaching out for help when you're at that state, you're really at the point of like, we can't go on. Something has to
Something
change.
has to change. Yeah.
Yeah. And so the work that we do is how can you as the parent develop a set of tools that's going to build your kid up on the inside? Because that's where change has to start. The kid has to see themselves differently, believe differently, and then once that happens, they're going to behave differently. So you're getting at the root of what's going on. And at the same time, you have to learn how to not get sucked into all this negativity and drama and power struggles, because that's going to just inadvertently make things worse. And then kind of the third piece of this is a discipline model that teaches skills, accountability. Everybody makes a mistake. How do you learn from that and move forward? Versus what's typically happening where they just give in and let their kids get away with murder because the discipline doesn't work anyway. And usually when they do, things just get worse. Or what is the escalating consequence that I can give, the punishment that I can give that's going to motivate them to stop, which never happens. And then it's just all this shame that's thrown into the mix. And then there's just additional tension, additional conflict, and additional mess. So when parents are able to kind of accomplish those three things, what happens is the kid has a different belief and a different experience about who they are. They behave in a way that's congruent with that. When they make mistakes, it's not a big deal. It doesn't mean they're bad. It's just an opportunity to try something different and learn from that. And that's just the way that we learn any new skill. You have to fail over and over and over again and practice recovering before you get mastery.
Let me ask you a question. I don't know if you've ever been asked this, but when you talk about as a parent, you're going to make mistakes, you're going to get your hands dirty, you're it's going to be messy. Parenting is not like this, super clean, straight shot. You know, you and I, before we hit record, yeah, we were talking about our physical therapy and it's
Yeah,
like, and you and I were talking about how physical therapy is never like this linear, like perfect, healing trajectory. It's like, okay, I'm good. Oh, now this happened. Okay. Like I'm good again. Okay. Oh man, now this. And your physical therapist is there to work with you as you go through those ebbs and flows. In relationships, though, let me ask this. Do you only get so many chances? Like, and the reason I ask this question, I don't know if I've ever asked this question from any other podcast guest, but you've got a vast knowledge that I think is just fascinating. I see this like in marriage a lot. And let me explain. Let's just say, a couple's been married for 10 plus years, right? She's doing things that he doesn't like and he's doing things that she doesn't like and vice versa, and there's like these micro fractures, like these, it's like the death of a thousand cuts, right?
yeah,
So you get to the point where like suddenly after a death of a thousand cuts, the person just bleeds out, there's no more, and there's no more room for mistakes.
right.
Is parenting the same?
Yeah, so that's interesting because in any other relationship except parenting, you can leave at any time.
Yeah, oh yeah, yeah,
So when you're a parent, you can't just say I'm done parenting. Not only are there legal consequences to that, but this kid's still dependent upon you. So you can't just terminate that relationship.
right.
And when you're a kid, you can't just say, okay, I no longer want you to be my parent. You're stuck. So there's this interesting concept. It's called being the good enough parent, where kids are extremely resilient and they can get through almost anything. And if you make the same mistake over and over and over and over and over again as a parent, it's almost like your kid has the bandwidth to be able to tolerate that as long as you can get it right at some point. And when you're dependent upon someone, as a child is for a parent, and the parent keeps screwing everything up, but then all of a sudden they shift gears and start getting it right, there's like this huge relief and this desire to reconnect. I don't see like, unless you're traumatizing and abusing your kid, which is not what we're talking about right
Right.
now. We're just talking about wanting what's best, but maybe not having the right tools. I think you have an unlimited basket of mistakes that you can make, and your kid will still be okay. If you at some point pivot and learn the skills that are going to help. Now, the older kids get, probably the less open they are to that. But I mean, think about your story. Like you have a relationship with your dad now.
I do.
Like even though you had 30 years where you didn't, right? It's almost like we're created to need that relationship with our parent. And if at any point they're willing to take ownership and learn a new way of connecting and be available, like the relationship can find a way to exist.
Can I comment on that for a minute?
Yeah.
Me and Mason, my 16-year-old, he asked me about a year ago when we were getting ready to go over to my dad's house for Christmas. I think you probably know this story, but I'll share it real quick. And he knows the story of like my dad, leaving when I was a kid, and then he left again when I was 12, and then randomly ran into him and when I was 30, before Mason was even born. And Mason asked me when we were getting ready to go over there one day, and Mason doesn't really ask me a whole lot of questions like that are deep, unless and Mason's a very deep thinker, but he doesn't really say them out loud unless he's really gelling on it and he's really curious about it. And he just asked me one day, he's like, "Do you even like going over there?" And I just kind of smiled, because that's a question I would expect out of any of my other three kids, but not him.
Yeah.
And I'm like, "Why do you ask?" And he's like, and he just had this look on his face of like anger. And he's just like, "I don't know how you do it." And I'm like, "What do you mean?" And he's like, "How can you forgive him? Like, I would never forgive you. In fact, if I saw you on the street, I would probably hit you and I would pummel you for leaving me twice. Like, how do you forgive him?" And I just kind of smiled. And, I'm at a different part of my life too, where, like I truly believe that the only person that dies is the one that holds a grudge. So you have to forgive, if not selflessly, but selfishly as well, right? Because
Yeah.
it's going to eat you alive. But here's the thing: the moment that my dad, I'll never forget us being at dinner, and my dad owned every bit of everything. And he's just like, the most horrible thing, most horrible decision I made. I made, I felt like I was doing the right thing. I felt like I was actually making the decision for you. Like I was
Yeah.
actually making your life better. And he's like, and selfishly, like I was probably making it for myself too, but I was trying to make it selflessly, but it was a horrible decision.
Right.
Horrible. And if I had to do all over again, would have never made that decision ever. And like he's like, and I've had to carry that for decades, right? And my dad asked for forgiveness and I just gave it to him, right? And the thing is that like I guess that in a way that shows that if a parent does give full ownership and ask for forgiveness, I'm not saying it works every time, but like my mother and I, we don't speak. And my mom has never been one of those people. And I've apologized to her for my actions. I definitely wasn't the perfect kid growing up. But my mom has never said, I'm so sorry that I drank so much all the time and I was drunk so much all the time and I had these outbursts. Like there's never been any ownership ever.
Right.
And but I do know that if she asked for it, I would forgive her and move on. And I don't know if that's maybe we as human beings sort of in a way yearn for our parents so much that maybe it's that easy to repair. I don't know.
Yeah. Yeah. I had a few thoughts while you were sharing this. Like just the difference between kind of how your dad's owned it versus your mom. It sounds like your dad understands how his decisions impacted you
Yeah.
and was able to show you that he understood your pain and was sorry for that.
Yeah. 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 Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
and like for relationships to heal from hurt like that, the forgiveness has to have those three. Here's what I did wrong. Here's how it impacted you, and I'm really sorry. What is it that you need moving forward that I can provide to rebuild trust and connection? Like those are ingredients in any relationship, but the need and the desire to be connected to your parent never goes away. And so, when you were talking about how Mason kind of views that and how angry he would be, and he'd probably even assault you or refuse to be around you. I don't think he could actually have those thoughts and walk through that if he didn't have an outstanding relationship with you. Because how would he know what he's missing? Because he has a great relationship with you and he's connected and feels safe and knows that you love him and you're there and you have his back, he can't fathom what it would be like. Right. But if he didn't have that, and all of a sudden you just showed up and said, hey, I want to have a relationship with you. I understand how I screwed up and how that hurt you. Like he'd be desperate for that. Right. Thank God he
Yeah.
doesn't have to walk that path. But, I think because he's in a really healthy, well-connected family, that the thought of you abandoning him he knows what he would lose.
Yeah. Yeah. And truth be told, I'd hate to be on the other side of him beating me up because he's way stronger than me and he's on the offensive line and he would kill me. I have no doubt. Like,
Yeah. Yeah. You
um,
have no chance.
no, you don't. Not at all. What do you have another example that you could share? Because like I said, I love hearing these stories of success and this is what this family was facing before. This is what they did to overcome, and
Mhm.
this is what they're enjoying now.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm just thinking about a couple clients that I'm working with right now that chose to adopt children. One of them um, adopted twins at birth, and the other one adopted their grandkids because their mom or their daughter, which is the kid's mom, wasn't fit and had to give up her rights. But so both and the kids are somewhere between like 4 and 8, the group of kids that we're talking about now. But it's just they come when they're at a point the kids are aggressive or the kids aren't listening or they're constantly challenging our authority, they're fighting with each other, and there's just all this tension. And these are really good parents, though. These are really good humans. The tools they have to discipline and to connect to their kids aren't quite effective or powerful enough for the type of kids that they're raising. And so when we work together over a 90-day period, I'm helping them find very specific ways to connect to their kid in the way that the kid can receive it, and then believe differently about themselves and believe differently about the adults that are raising them. Because I don't know if you kind of subscribe to this myth, but I used to believe that it was like we should control our kids, or we could control our kids.
I would love to talk about that.
Yeah, just so you know, that's a myth. You can't
Right.
control your kids, and nor should you. The job is not to control your children. It's to teach them how to control themselves.
Amen to
And
that.
and if you're constantly in this like situation where you feel like I can't control my kids, I have no control in my home, the impulse is to try to control them through discipline. It just creates more chaos and conflict. But when I work with parents over a 90-day period, the end game is the kids are regulating themselves. They're in control of themselves, and they're choosing decisions that are going to enhance their life rather than destroy their relationships. And we do that by specific tools that are going to build the kid up on the inside and help or connect differently to your kid. That's going to meet what they're needing on an emotional and psychological point of view. And then the behavior improves as as a result of that. And then at the same time, how do you like get all of this negativity and this tension and conflict? How do you withdraw that from the relationship so it no longer becomes necessary? Because like all misbehavior is just a form of communication.
Mm.
Something's wrong, something's broken, something's not working. I don't understand it. I don't know how to articulate it, but I know what I can do that will drive you nuts and guarantee you stay connected to me.
Because they don't care, right? I mean, the
No, kids
attention
don't,
is,
yeah,
yeah.
kids don't care about good and bad attention, good and bad connection. They just want the most alive, animated, trustworthy version of you. And unfortunately, the way our brain is wired, when problems are happening, our brain says, go attend to it. And unfortunately, what happens when you have kids that are challenging or maybe are having a hard time regulating, you provide a lot of connection and attention to that and just inadvertently train your kid to continue to have those problems.
So you're basically feeding the one thing that you don't want to see, correct?
Yes, and
Yeah.
doing it because you deeply love the kid.
Right.
Because if you didn't love them, you wouldn't be upset, triggered, frustrated when they're being disrespectful or defiant or having a meltdown.
How attuned? So the question I have for you with like, so when I'm laughing only because I've heard so many different responses. So I run, obviously you're one of our clients in the data boardroom, right? And we do
Yep.
focus on marriage there. Um, I run another group on the side called Creating Extraordinary Marriage. And like you, I run that 90 days at a time. And so I teach men, 10 skills that will help them with communication, connection, intimacy, all those things. And one of the first things, and this kind of came as a surprise to me when I first started doing this mastermind about 3 years ago, is that one of the things that came up that I didn't expect, and you think I would, but now it's a totally normal thing. They're like, guys will come to me and be like, my wife is like, why are you asking me these questions? And why are you talking to me like this? And why are you suddenly different? Like they get suspect, right? Like,
Yeah.
what's going on here? Right. But they like it, but at the same time, they're like, this, you're messing with my need of certainty. I know you act like this over here, and suddenly you're acting like this over here.
Yeah.
So, but then obviously the new norm becomes the norm over time. With kids, if they view us as like, well, if I do this, I know I'm going to get the attention I need. That's not the way they obviously think about it. But
Yeah.
as soon as we start doing something different, how does that impact, I guess, maybe their perception of us and the relationship? Because they're like tiny, they could be teenagers or they could be kids, but like, what are they thinking when they're like, okay, mom or dad's not responding the way that they used to, or maybe they're not, but they're actually even proactively doing things different with me that they weren't before. Do they have a similar response to stuff like that?
Yeah. You know, not really big on diagnosis anymore for children. No, I'm not saying that that's not legit or anything. It's just I like to view kids as energy seekers or kids that are
Okay.
just more intense. And what's really interesting is when kids are so used to pushing buttons to get reactions, and that's what they rely and trust. And that's how, to be, when you start to be like really positive and self-controlled, they're going to look at you cross-eyed. And most of the kids, they start to become really suspicious. Like, are you doing this because you're trying to get me to behave? Are you doing this because you mean it? You, I'm just really big on being 100% transparent as soon as you notice the kid having that response, and telling them this, like, listen, you noticed a change in me. This is actually different. This is weird. Actually, I'm not really good at it yet. And it makes sense to me that you'd be like suspicious. Let me just tell you what I'm doing and why. I realize that as a parent, I've been focusing way too much on the problems. Me telling you to stop, me yelling, me getting all bent out of shape. That I'm sorry for doing that, and that must put a lot of stress on you. From now on, I want to be a parent that builds you up, that encourages you, that focuses on what's going well. And when somebody makes a mistake, it's just a mistake. It's not a big deal. I'm more interested in how you're going to fix it and move on. So from this point on, I'm going to be really, really hold myself accountable to pointing out these things. And it might sound different, it might be weird, but get used to it because I'm not stopping. When
Wow.
you fill in the blanks for the kids and explain what you're doing and why, and it's I'm taking ownership for me because I love you. I've never had a kid say that's a ridiculous idea. I don't like that. It's when they don't know and they see you different, they fill in the blank with some kind of story or narrative that probably isn't true.
I think the inner child in me just melted a little bit. I'm I'm not kidding. Like if that might be one of the coolest things that I think a kid could hear.
Mhm.
Let me ask you
That's
this.
that's what they're longing for, Larry. They
Yeah,
they want deep connection, but they want it in a way that's going to build them up and strengthen the attachment rather than tear them down on the inside and stress the attachment.
I love that. And yeah, I'll be really honest, man. That hit me in the chest like big time. I can only imagine like how a kid would positively probably respond to that. Now,
Mhm.
let's take this one step further. So we're now this renewed parent, and this is the way that we're going to go about it, right? And this is not to say that we're not ever going to make mistakes because we are going to
That's
make mistakes, right? But what do we do when, because you see all these people, especially like now that we have social media and everything, and then we always think back to like, I mean, Dan, no, you want to hear something crazy? I put a quick reel out on a quick video out on social, and there was a guy, and I think he's in his 50s now, he said, but like I read this comment and I was just like, wow. But like the comment, reading the comment made me think, it's that part of you as a parent that's like uneducated, but also you're like, wow, does what am I trying to, does corporal punishment actually really work? Like, cause you put something on social, be like, well, you should spank the kid more. Or you should, or this happened to me when I was a kid and I straightened right up. So I put this video out and it was about, I can't remember what it was about, but this guy commented on it. He's like, I'm 54 years old. He's like, I came home and I got a D in one of my classes. And my dad whooped me so hard with a belt that from then on out, I was a straight A student. I got a full ride in college. I became this, this, and this. Like there was like a laundry list of like really fantastic, unbelievable accomplishments. And it was the launching pad was when he came home with a D and his dad like beat him to death with this belt.
Mhm.
So like you read stuff like that online, or that's maybe our experience. And
Yeah.
people will like buy into that, be like, okay, well, yeah, I guess I should maybe hit my kid more, or maybe I should yell at him more, maybe just punish him way worse. Like I'm curious from your perspective, like this fine line between parent accountability, right? Connection, attachment, discipline, but also not coddling them at the same time. Like I feel like in a way when you're a parent, you've got like this melting pot of like all these things, right? And you have
Yeah.
to know when to do them and when not. So like from a disciplinary action, like let's just say the kid, like we have this agreement, right? Like we're okay. we're not dishonest in our house. You know, my expectation of you is that, you know, we have at least a C average in all your classes, you know, and if not, you know, if there's an F, we're going to have to do something about that. But like, what is the balance when you mentioned on the last podcast, it's either, it doesn't matter if it's 3 inches out of bounds if you're playing basketball, or you end up in the third row, you're out of bounds. So how do we do that and do it well?
Yeah, I think it's a juggling act, and you're probably juggling, like you said, this melting pot. You're probably juggling like 4 or 5 things at the same time. And it's only going to work if you can effectively juggle all these different variables. Because if you drop one or two, everything seems to fall apart. But I think from a discipline point of view, to really be able to teach lesson, because discipline means to teach and train. It doesn't mean to make you pay or come up with punishment that's going to make you suffer. Discipline is teaching and training. And I've found it to be a lot more effective when you can discipline when you're calm and you're super clear with where the line is. If you're not clear with what the rule is C or higher, or B or higher, or no line. If you're not super clear, it's hard to hold your kid accountable consistently, because kids are just going to learn, maybe this is the exception, or sometimes I can get away with it. Or I don't know about your kids, but when my kids don't hold the line with their grades and now there's discipline or accountability there, it's always somebody else's fault. Well, the teacher forgot to update it, or somebody in class, I overslept, or like whatever. If the line is super clear, here's what we expect. And if you cross it, I'm going to hold you accountable, but I'm not going to be emotionally wrapped up in trying to get you to follow the rules, or be emotionally disrupted because you broke the rules. The lesson can be taught. And that's really the whole point of discipline. Is right now you don't have the skill. You need to practice, fail, figure it out, and grow and get stronger. And for that process to happen, I have to get the heck out of the way. I can't be all emotionally tied to your decisions and try to prevent you from making mistakes, or try to convince you to do the right thing. I got to give you the freedom to choose so that you can learn it's your own. But if you make the mistake, I'm going to hold you accountable, whatever the discipline looks like, whether it's, loss of privilege, or, I personally don't spank my kids, but some parents do. And there's probably a lot of parents out there that would say, I was spanked and it was helpful. I don't know if that answers your question. I kind of went, a few different angles there, but
No, it does. I mean, I think holding your kids accountable is something that, like, you know, one thing that we talk about in this one thing that we leverage in this house is what we call the agreement. In a way, I guess, as I say it out loud, the agreement is kind of like if you're playing basketball, you grew up playing basketball,
mhm,
that if we're going to play this game in basketball, the teams, the coaches, and the refs, we all are in agreement of what the rules are. And if those rules are broken, then we're going to be called. And the ref
yeah.
doesn't, well, some refs, but for
In
the most
baseball,
part.
they do.
But, like in our house, what we do is, like, so for instance, my oldest son wanted, this sounds crazy, but he just turned 18, and we pay for his phone right now. And he's in his junior year of high school, and we've never allowed him to have Snapchat. And, he's got, he's got time limits on all of his apps. So, like, doesn't matter what it is, Netflix or, whatever. He's got time limits. It's like 1 hour, and then his phone shuts down except for being able to call and text and all that. So my son came to me about 4 or 5 months ago, and he's like, I'd like to have Snapchat on my phone. I think I'm old enough. And I'm like, okay. I was like, well, if you want to have Snapchat on your phone, we need to come to an agreement on the boundaries and what needs to be upheld on your end if we're going to do that. I was like, because think about it. This is another app. This is another thing that will take time away from you and away from other things. And I told him, I said, I want you to take first stab at this agreement and what we could agree upon. So
Mhm.
we went back and forth on a few things, and we both agreed. I was like, okay, for you to have Snapchat, you have to have a C average or higher in all of your classes. Your room needs to be clean at least once a week, and we're going to check in on that at 5 p.m. on Sundays, right? Your laundry needs to be done and folded and ready for the week by 5 p.m. on Sundays. Certain things like that that were pretty basic stuff, right? But ways to hold him accountable. The rules are associated. Well, he got a D in his government class, and I was like, hey, and I, the old me 10 years ago would have probably been pissed that he got a D. Be like, well, you can't have Snapchatting, right? But instead, I was like, hey, and you remember we agreed upon, right? Because we actually put it in the notes of our phone, and it's a shared document.
Yeah.
And I was like, one of these rules have been broken. One of our agreement items have been broken. I was like, so we have a D. So what do you think that means? And he's like, I have to delete Snapchat. I'm like, yes, you do. I was like, until your grades come up. And it was a conversation that was literally that easy. And he's like, okay. And he deleted it off. It's still not on there because that grade
Yeah.
hasn't come up yet. But and it won't until that grade comes up. But it's a lot easier to have what we call the agreements and then hold them accountable at a certain cadence of what's expected. And then that way everybody knows their role in this whole thing. Do you think that do you think
Yeah.
that
What I like about that is number one, it's easy for you to hold him accountable when he got that D because you had already laid out crystal clear what the expectations were,
Mm.
and when you do that well, and when things get violated, you remain calm and just stick to the plan or the agreement here. The you create space for the kid to learn and focus on their behavior rather than get distracted with the drama that usually happens between the parent and kid. And so the discipline or the consequence did the teaching, not the frustration or the irritation of the parent. Because I mean,
right?
I'll be honest, there's times where I go down that road where it's
Sure.
like, don't talk back to me. And I get triggered by that or irritated or reactive towards that. And then the disciplining from my perspective, when I do that, when I'm irritated, frustrated, and I'm like what the kid's learning is dad's pissed, not the importance of telling the truth or the importance of being able to communicate when you're frustrated. They just learn dad's pissed, he's angry with me. I don't like that. I'm not going to take ownership of that. And now there's really no learning. You're just learning that, somebody's upset and frustrated. And if you're not careful and that happens over and over again, the belief the kid gets is I'm bad. There's something wrong with me. Rather than I made a mistake. I didn't manage my time well. Let me get my grade back up and then I can have that privilege again. That's the lesson you want them to learn.
100%. 100%. This has been amazing, man. Every time I feel like we've talked about everything, we talk about more good
Yeah.
stuff. You're a blessing to this podcast, man. You're a blessing to this mission and movement, and the things you teach. Is there anything that we left out, or anything that you want to address that we haven't?
Um, I think when it comes to discipline, there's just like one other thing, and this is what I'm starting to learn about myself, as well as just coaching parents day in and day out, like a really constant theme. One of the obstacles of being able to remain calm when your kids are breaking rules and not really try to get wrapped up in getting them to stop or getting them to behave differently. One of them is like you need to be clear on what the line is before you can hold your kid accountable. But what I've noticed for me is the times that I'm getting irritated with my kids' behavior, it's because they're revealing something about myself that I need to grow in as well.
Mm.
And my 12-year-old, who's probably he's got the greatest heart on the planet. He's the most loving, kind-natured kid. But when he gets irritated or he gets anxious, he says and does things that's totally out of character. But I've been having a really hard time with some of his disciplines, like how much screen time or how much sweets he's having. Um, the reason I'm irritated is because that's something I'm struggling with myself. And it's a lot easier to project onto him and try to get him to change rather than look in the mirror and get my stuff in order first.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so anytime you're losing patience with your kids, I tend to look at it from one of three lenses. What are you putting up with and tolerating that you need to be clear about and hold your kid accountable. What area of your life do you need to like grow and learn instead of just putting all the attention in on your kids? And then the other kind of variable that affects that is, what are your values? Because anytime your values are being violated by your kid, you're going to be drawn to go try to correct it. And if you're not aware of it, that's where you start to get all frustrated and bent out of shape.
You also, there's two more, Dan. How much sleep I got, and if I'm really hungry.
Yep. Oh yeah.
Oh no, I actually I was like, I don't know if you heard the clicking, but I'm like ravenously typing as you're I'm like, okay, what you're putting up with, what you're tolerating, where we need to grow and learn ourselves, and where are our values and where are they being violated. No, that is so true. Every time I talk to you, man, it doesn't matter whether it's on the podcast or whether I hear you speak up in our group coaching in the boardroom, or whether we're just, talking in person, walking to the next event at the summit. Like, I always
Yeah.
feel like I get to learn something from you. And man, I'm so appreciative of that. Um, Truly from the bottom of my heart. Thank you for that.
Yeah, no problem. Love talking about this stuff. Really appreciate, just the trust you give me to speak on
Oh
your
yeah.
platform because my heart's that peace, love, joy is restored in homes and that the parents are the ones leading and creating that. Because when you decide to become a parent, you have a picture in your head of what that's going to look like. And when
Oh
that's
yeah.
not happening, I can think of very few things that create more agony for parents.
Mm. You said it so well. That's 100%. Well, you're welcome back anytime, man. We could do the Larry and Dan weekly show. They'd get so
Yeah,
much
there we
value.
go.
Yeah, you and Uncle Joe, they just love you guys. Uh, well, where can men find you, and what's the best way for them to connect with you?
Yeah, so the thing that I do the most is I have a 90-day coaching program to help parents kind of create some of the changes and alleviate some of the problems we were talking about today. So for your audience, it's just go to my website. It's thecompassforlife.com/dad edge. There's a direct way to reach out to me, and I would say that would probably be the best way to get a hold of me. If you had a question, we could even just schedule a call, learn a little bit more about what you're needing. And then my website just has a lot of resources, and my social, all the videos and content I put out. That's a good hub for any more additional information.
We got it. And I just want to remind the audience, it's the compass, the number four
Right.
life. It's don't spell out four. It's the compass, the number four life .com and /dad edge. And I just tested the page and it's there for you guys. So guys, you won't have to look far. We'll have a link for Dan, all of his social media, also all previous shows as well that Dan has been on, because he's talked about different topics on each show. Every show he's done has been insanely valuable, and I know you guys in the audience have loved it because I keep hearing from you guys that you want to hear more from Dan. All you have to do is head on over to the dadedge.com/Friday 149 for this show. Again, the dadedge.com/Friday 149 for this show. Dan, thank you so much, man. You are a gift to parents, gift to me, gift to our community. And just keep being you, man, because like every time I have an interaction with you, I always walk away with just such a great experience and lessons of gold, and appreciate you, man.
Yeah. Feelings mutual, Larry. Appreciate your
Appreciate,
time.
appreciate you too. Gentlemen, go out and live legendary. Take care.